So today we're going to do something a little different than normal. So we're going to be taking the old workhorse here that I've been filming with for the past several months and giving it a nice refresh. So thanks to Micro Center and the great deals they have on like bundles, we have a new Gigabyte AM5 motherboard, the latest and greatest Ryzen 7 7800 X3D, and a set of G.Skill Flare X5 RAM. This is DDR5 at 6,000 speed. All of this was included in a bundle for just under $500. So since the bundle didn't include a cooler, I went ahead and picked up this DeepCool AK620 Zero Dark cooler as well, and some thermal paste. So we're gonna throw all this in here and I will show you guys how I go about building a computer.
So one thing that I forgot to mention at the time of recording is that before you start disconnecting stuff, go to the website of your manufacturer for the motherboard and download the drivers that you need for both the BIOS and for the Wi-Fi. Download these to a thumb drive, make sure to extract them there. That way, when you first start up your computer, you can just install the drivers that you need directly from that stick. And then from there, you should be smooth sailing. You should be able to connect to the Wi-Fi and download all the other drivers from there.
So since I'm not upgrading the power supply, this is going to make this job a lot faster. All of these cables that we already have pulled, we can just leave them and we don't have to worry about them later. They can just go right back in place. All right, so we're just gonna start disconnecting cables from here. Almost there. All right. Now that one's out. All right, so we've got the power connections for the graphics card, the motherboard, and the processor off. Now we just gotta get everything else off. So we've got the HD audio, we've got several fans, and USB, and case connections for the power and reset, and a couple fans back there, as well as the processor cooling fans. So now we just gotta rip all of these off as well, and then we can take the graphics card out. Okay, so we've got all of our connections pulled off here. Everything for fans, all the power stuff, all the SATA cables, everything's disconnected right now. Now we'll get the graphics card taken out. Actually, first I think we're going to take this little Wi-Fi adapter out. I think that should slip out nice and easily. There we go. There's the old Wi-Fi adapter, since this board did not have Wi-Fi on it. Now it's time for the graphics card. All right, the latch has been released. Now this should come straight out. And there we have it. So we can leave the RAM and the cooler in place. Now we're just gonna start taking the screws off. All right, so now that we have all of the motherboard screws off, we're gonna just try pulling this out. This is the only, well, not really the only, but this is definitely a disadvantage of having a compact case, because everything is so tight in there. All right, now we've got the old motherboard out. So the only other thing that we're going to be using from inside this motherboard, we're not going to be using the RAM anymore, and we're not going to be using this cooler anymore. But I do have a NVMe stick inside of here that needs to come out. And then there is our M.2 drive. And the rest of this is pretty much useless to us, so we don't need to take any of this off. We're just going to leave this how it is and just set it aside for now. All right, so now that the demo of all the old stuff is done, now we can have some fun with the new parts. So let's get the motherboard out of here, and we'll start building this thing together. Installation guide. So definitely don't throw these away. A lot of building computers, honestly, is just reading the manual, and that's pretty much all there is to it. It's very simple, and that's something that I like about it. So there's the new motherboard. Now we're going to be putting the processor in it first. So this little latch right here holds this protective plastic in. Just take that off like that and pull this out. Just latches in right down the side, and we've got the plastic off. So right there that triangle is the one I was talking about earlier. There's a spot on the processor that lines directly up with that. So let's get our processor out. So when you're handling this, you definitely don't want to touch the underside, but you also want to try to avoid touching the top of it as much as possible, where the heatsink is, just so you don't have any like finger grease on there to screw up. You know, when you put the thermal paste on it, you want a nice solid connection between this top part of the processor and the heatsink of the cooler. So don't touch the top, don't touch the bottom, just touch it right on the sides, just like that. And there's that triangle on the processor, and we're going to line that up with the triangle in the motherboard. Now if you've got it in the right place, it shouldn't give you any wiggle up and down or left and right. So we know that we're in there because that's not moving. So now we can close this. And then we're going to take this latch and hook it underneath. So now it's in there nice and solid. All right, let's set that over there. And let's take our cooler out. So inside of here, we'll have all of our different mounting options. And there's our cooler. And then here is what you're going to need most, the manual. So, like I said, computer building is really just reading manuals. So we're looking for the socket type that we have, which is AM5. Where are you? AMD. All right, so AM5. So we've got a couple things we got to remove, which are these pieces here. So we're going to take them off, replacing them with the set that they included inside of this kit. So let's get to it. First things first, we got to take these off, and we can use the screwdriver that they gave us. All right, so the manual calls for 4 H screws to go in there. So we're looking for the H's, and if we go back to the beginning of the manual, we'll see that the H screws look just like that, and they include just 4 of them. So this one was actually pretty easy. Inside of this bag is all the AMD screws that we're going to need. So we've got the 2 brackets, and then we've got the H screws sitting right inside of here. That gets screwed down in and needs the nipple facing upward. So we just thread these in, and we do not need to tighten the shit out of them. In fact, it won't even let us tighten the shit out of them. As soon as you get to the stopping point, it pretty much stops you. Just like that. So now we're ready for the next step. It's kind of hard to see. It might be even harder to see on camera. But it says CPU right here, and it has an arrow pointing to which way it needs to be. So these can be put on backwards. For example, that says CPU right there, and it's pointing that way. But you can attach it like that. This will not work. I have made that mistake before. So we're going to set this in here with the outside screw and the CPU port facing the right way. Just like that. So next we have eye screws. So now we need the eye screws. Look just like that. And we have just 4 of them. So they're just like a little knob with threads. This little bag right here. These are the eye screws I was just talking about. Get them loose to start off with. There's no reason to tighten them up before you get all of them on. And these ones we do need to tighten down with a screwdriver. So we're just going to snug these up. That's good. That's good. That is good. There we go. Now we're all tightened up. All right, before we mount the cooler itself, now is a good time to put the RAM in. All right, so here's our new sticks of RAM, G.Skill Flare X5, DDR5 6000. Speed, RAM only goes in one way, but if you notice right here on the board, it says first. You want to use the A2 and the B2 slots first. This slot right here is A1, then you got A2, and then B1 and B2. And then once you've got it lined up, then you just push them in hard and snap it in place. Do one side at a time, and you hear it snapping in, just like that. All right, so everything else for the cooler install can pretty much be packaged up and put away. We do not need anything else from this point forward. So all these bags and all the extra pieces are all Intel stuff. We don't need to worry about any of this. So one thing that I always do before putting this cooler on is I test fit stuff and just make sure the wires will go the way that I want them to. So as it sits right now, the screws, there's one here and there's one there. Now we can do this facing this way only, I believe, for now with the way the fan's configured. Because if we were to have it sitting the other way, this fan would easily get blocked by that. So this will only sit on in one way, and we will need to take the fans off anyway in order to tighten these screws on. So we're going to pull the fans off, which just have these little clips connecting them to the radiator right there. So we're just going to pop them off. So now we're going to take our thermal compound out of here. So here we've got our MX4 Arctic thermal compound. The way that I've always put it on is just by a little dollop in the center. So I'm going to do that with this processor as well. It's never failed me in the past. So we're just going to squeeze it right there in the center. That should be just big enough of a dot. You want to get it dead center. And now we're ready to mount the cooler itself. So this label right here, obviously you want to take this off before you put it on. If you didn't, you'd have some serious problems. So do not forget that. We're just going to set this right on top. Now we'll start screwing it in. One side a little bit and then the other side a little bit. So once you feel it start to thread in, give it a few turns and then move over to the other one. You want to tighten this down as evenly as you possibly can. All right, so now both sides are in. So now we're just going to do about a turn and a half on each one until it is fully seated in there. Again, this is not something that you want to tighten the absolute piss out of. Nothing is. On a computer, they're quite sensitive little beings. Once you feel it starting to get towards the end, just make sure you're giving it nice even turns on everything. You know, when one feels tight, make sure the other one feels tight. That one's starting to feel pretty tight. That one feels pretty good right there. We'll make sure that this one down here feels the exact same way. A little bit more. Right there. Last little twist for this one. And we are good. So now, she's not going anywhere. Now we can figure out how we want to orient the fans. So we'll have to take a look at what type of system we've got here. So I like to use the CPU fan and CPU opt for this. Cable management starts right here. So these are going to be the first sets of cables that you put on your computer. Find a system that works for, you know, the way that this is. And we want to make sure that this pulls through this way. So this fan will be a pulling fan, and this one will be basically a push-pull because it's going to be pulling from here and then pushing into this one. So the orientation of the fan air direction can be seen on the sides of the fans. So this one right here is more rotational arrow, so the fan will be spinning that way. And if we go over to here, we have an arrow facing that way, showing us that the air will be blowing this way across this fan. So make sure that when you put these in, you have that the correct way. So these clips that you see on this fan can be taken out. When you twist them this way, you can see that little piece of rubber start coming out. So if you want to take it out to reorient your fan a little bit, You just pop them out like this. Just make sure it's nice and flat to the fan itself, and those clips come out like that. You likely will need to take them out in order to manage this cable and make it look nice. So I'm going to pull these off just to see how I want this fan to sit on the cooler. So now we'll snap this on here. So where this is exiting, I think this is going to be how I'm going to do it, at least for this one. And we'll just find a way to get this other one to sort of match so that they both come out at the same spot, and we can tie them up nicely and then just kind of tuck them down below. That way they're out of the way and unseen. All right, so now we've got all the fans attached to the cooler. Like I was saying earlier, I've got the fan cables exiting at the same point now. So they're both coming out from down here, which all that took was taking these little snapping connectors off of the top two and then moving them over to the side. You'll notice that both of these fans are still doing the exact same thing they're supposed to. So they're both going to be pulling air in through this way. Got fresh air coming in through the front. Those fans push the air over this way, and then it goes through from this fan into this radiator, and then this fan will pull from here and then out the back, and then it'll go out the exhaust fan right over there. So now we just need to tie these together, wrap them up all nice and neat, and then we can just tuck them and get them out of sight, out of mind. Somewhere around this heatsink area, they'll just be tucked down there and they will never be seen again. So now we have it like that. And we just take this and tuck it right down underneath, never to be seen again. And we just have these two wires coming up and out of here. So now we're going to need to get our M2 or M.2 storage in here. Definitely do not want to forget this because this has my windows on it. So we'll pull this up and out. And it does have adhesive on it, just like the old one does. All right, there we go. So there's our old M.2 stick. So we've got 970 EVO just like that. Here's our connectors. This part right here is the back end where you screw down at. So you want to take this and plug it into its port. This little screw that came with our motherboard needs to tap that down right inside of there. So we're just going to take this screw out, and we want to screw our stick down. So now we take this cover for it and we snap it into the back end. Once that seats, just make sure you line it up real good and then push it down until it hits where its screw is, and then you just tighten the screw. And now we have our M.2 installed, we have our processor installed, we've got the cooler installed, and we've got our RAM. So you see why we did the RAM first, because this fan gets in the way, which we can always take the fan off, and since we have to take the fan off anyway to put the cooler itself on, I just prefer doing the RAM first. That way it's like not an afterthought. I don't do everything for the cooler and then say, oh fuck, you know, I forgot. So do the RAM first, so it might just save you some time in the end. Now that this is all done with, now this is ready to go back in the case. What I basically wanted to do before putting this in is see what kind of wires we're missing and kind of like take a look at the fan layout options that we have around the board. So one big thing right here, this is the power for the processor up here. You'll notice that there's only an 8-pin here, but there's a total of 12 on the new board. So right there alone, we definitely need to pull one more wire inside of the case. The USB connector is on a different spot here. So we've got the connector right here on this board. This is the old one, and then we have it over here on the new board. Before we throw all that extra weight from the motherboard itself inside this case, is I'm going to route this wire that we need for the CPU power. We're going to take this power supply off a little bit. That way I can actually access where the pin connectors are at. We're going to take these thumb screws out the back. So this is probably going to be the most annoying part of the entire rebuild, because this is in a very tight spot inside of here. So we'll just trace this one out. This is the existing CPU power cable. So if we follow this, I would just about guarantee that the next open slot is probably right beside it or right underneath of it. Might need a flashlight here. And there's the slot we need. I can see it. Well, I think I heard it just snap in. So let's check it. That looks like it's in. Let's just push on a little bit more just to verify. Try pulling on it. It is not coming out. So we are in there. Good. Alright, so now we can screw this back on, since that is the only extra cable that we had to run. Power supply is back in place. Now we have this cable that probably has to be run relatively directly straight up to where it's going. If I can get it weaseled around in here a little bit, which I think that is how it will work. We only need 4 of these, so there's no need for this entire thing to loop over there. But I think what we'll do is just bring them both through, attach one, and then send the other one back through the little grommet. So for now, I'm just going to pop it in like this. Now this is the best time that we're gonna have to clean this out, wipe it down, make sure it's like dust free. So I'm just going to grab a cloth and a can of air. And we're gonna wipe this area down, because some of these spots will not be accessible again once we get the motherboard installed. These areas can be quite hard to reach. So wipe it down as best as you can before putting it back in place. And if you do use a can of air, you're definitely going to want to come back and wipe down after that, because you're definitely going to blow dust all around inside of the case. So wipe it down after you use a can of air on something. One other nice change about these new motherboards is that they come with the I/O shield pre-installed on the back end. So this older one that I have did not do that. So we just need to take this shield right here and just take it off. Can't remember if it goes out the back. It does. It goes inside. So we just need to take that off. That's for the old motherboard. We can just set that one aside. And with all of that out of the way, we are now finally ready to put the new motherboard in. Alright, the motherboard is now sitting in the case. So now we just need to tighten it down with our screws before we start making any connections to the board itself. Make sure you are not over tightening these. They do not need to be tight as fuck. Alright, so once you put all your screws in, just double check and make sure that you have no open holes, which I am not seeing any. So at this point, now we are good to stand it up, and we can push those wires back into place where they need to go. So we're going to shove them through, and now we can just start connecting everything to the board, and we are on the home stretch. We are not too far from being finished with this. All right, so it looks like a few fans need to be rerouted just a little bit. So we had to do a little bit of rerouting of some of the fan wires, but we are now completely done wiring up everything to the motherboard. All of the cables are semi-reasonably organized in the back. So the last thing we have to put in place now is the graphics card, and then once we're done with that, we are completely finished, and we will be able to hook everything back up to our monitors and to a keyboard, mouse, all that stuff, and then we can start using this thing. So here's our graphics card. This is the XFX Radeon 6700 XT. This is the one that was already previously in the computer. And we're just going to be putting it right on back to where it was, hooking those power cables up and finishing this build. And then it's sitting in its slot right now, so we just have to push down on it and we'll hear a click, just like that. And it is now installed. We just need to tighten the 2 screws onto there. All right, now that we don't have an open hole, let's get the graphics card tightened down. All right, those are now snug. Now we'll just clip these connectors right on here. There's 1, and there is 2. So now we've got everything connected in here that needs to be connected. Need to make sure this straightens out a little bit. That way it looks nice. And there we have it. That is the finished product. So now that we have the graphics card in, and we are completely done attaching connectors, putting hardware in, we're just going to neaten up the back end a little bit. And then as soon as this is done, we're going to throw the side cover on here, and we're going to throw the tempered glass right back on the front. And then we're going to plug it in and turn it on, run those benchmarks that we did before, making all these upgrades. And then we are finished up.
Now, I didn't go super in depth with the before and after testing, but I did run some tests in CPU-Z, Geekbench 6, Cinebench 2024, and a general computer startup test just to see if that improved. First, we'll start with boot times. On average with the 3700X, we saw 22.08 seconds to get into the login screen of Windows 10, with the fastest boot being 20.9 seconds. With the 7800X3D, our average load into Windows time was 21.75 seconds, with the fastest time to boot being 20.67 seconds. An improvement? Sure, but not one you'd really notice. Next, we'll move into our Cinebench 2024 testing, where we conducted a 10-minute benchmark of both the CPU, multi-core, and the GPU. With our 3700X, we scored 7,068 points on the GPU test and 691 points on the multi-core CPU. Here's where our tests get a little bit more interesting. With the 7800X3D installed and the newer, faster RAM, the GPU score for the same test resulted in a score of 6679 points, which is 389 points less than the old RAM and processor. But of course, the 7800X3D killed the 3700X in the CPU multi-core test, scoring 1,053 points, which is 362 points higher than the 3700X. Geekbench 6 gave us multiple benchmarking options as well, so I tested the standard CPU benchmark and both the OpenCL and Vulkan options for the GPU testing. With the 3700X for the CPU benchmark, we ended up with a multi-core score of 8845 and a single core score of 1742. With the 7800X3D, however, we blew the 3700X out of the water with a multi-core score of 15,153 and a single core score of 2655. Not to mention how the 7800X3D completed the test in almost 1 minute less than the 3700X. Now, we aren't finished with Geekbench yet. We still have the Vulkan and OpenCL GPU tests, which the OpenCL test again was pretty interesting. With the 3700X, we scored 103,549, but the 7800X3D scored 102,037. That is a little bit less. Not a very large difference, but it still seems abnormal to me that we aren't getting improvements on every test with the processor and RAM upgrade. And this brings us to our Vulkan GPU test. We scored an impressive 115,755 points on the 3700X, but the 7800X3D managed to pull ahead for its first GPU win at 120,417 points. Our final testing was with CPU-Z, where we saw nothing but great things for the 7800X3D. With the 3700X, we saw an average multi-thread score of 5,319.2 and an average single-thread score of 505.3. The 7800X3D, however, averaged a multi-thread score of 7,156.6 and a single-thread score of 658.3. So that's it for the benchmarking softwares. Overall, a very big improvement in all CPU tests, with the GPU tests being more determined on the type of API used. But what's more important than benchmarking softwares are the noticeable differences I've felt since performing this upgrade. In terms of gaming, there really hasn't been a difference that I can feel. Most of my gaming since the upgrade and since the start of 2024 in general has been in VR. So there's not much to feel as a difference there, since the frame rate has to consistently match the refresh rate so you don't throw up all over your room. but I have been able to make minor increases to my graphical quality that I couldn't do before with the 3700X. The biggest difference for me has been the performance in DaVinci Resolve. I used to crash DaVinci quite regularly when I had my 3700X, especially when I do minor effects in the Fusion tab, but it seems with the CPU and RAM upgrade, DaVinci runs much more stable. And that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys who are regular viewers still had a good time with this quite different video, and if you're new here and just came to watch a computer get built, I hope this video was informative and entertaining for you as well. I wouldn't expect a video like this in the future. It's likely going to be quite a long time until I upgrade again, but it was still a fun video to make despite the audio quality not being so good and losing some recorded footage. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed, I'd appreciate you dropping a like and a comment down below on what you thought. Now get out of here.